Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. And today we're going to talk to a small business owner, or business owner, not necessarily small, but business owner, about how marijuana could possibly impact their business. It's just recently legalized in the state of Ohio. Angela Phillips is joining us now. Angela, tell us about your business, and let's start there. What do you do?
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Yeah, so we manufacture steel tube for the automotive, HVAC, and appliance industries. We have 2 plants here in Ohio.
Okay. So let's talk about Ohio and marijuana. I know you were not a fan of it being legalized there.
No.
Tell me about the campaign to fight back against this.
So we put a coalition together, I would say maybe in the later part of the year, just because we weren't sure that it was going to be a ballot initiative. And so it came down kind of late. And we were able to get on our coalition, the Ohio Manufacturers Association, the Business Roundtable, Chambers of Commerce, lots of different organizations that jumped in with us on this, insurance, Children's Hospital representatives, lots of different key people across the state of Ohio who were willing to pick up the fight against legalizing marijuana. And so we raised money, did campaigning on it, and still came up short, and it was still legalized.
And in terms of the vote, how lopsided was it?
So I believe the final was around 56.2% pro, and so it passed based on that. If you follow Ohio politics, back in August, we had a special election to try and raise that threshold for these kind of ballot initiatives to 60%. That did not pass either. So this was a big loss from my perspective, and from a lot of people across the gamut for the state of Ohio, on both sides of the aisle and in very different parts of the state.
So it's not actually for sale legally in Ohio at this point, I believe. But what is your concern in respect to how it could impact, once marijuana is legalized, how it could impact your workforce?
So first, the landscape in Ohio, we're number 3 in manufacturing. So we're heavily involved in manufacturing, a lot of metalworking, a lot of steel, a lot of other manufacturing here in Ohio. So one of the big pushes I had as a manufacturer was just trying to protect our workers in the workplace, as well as being able to hire people. We were already coming out of COVID. We were already struggling, trying to get people to pass a drug test on hiring, and knew that this was going to complicate that even more. And then individuals that come to work, we can't test them every single day. And so we couldn't, in my mind, it's my responsibility to make sure that everybody's safe in our workplaces. And I can't guarantee that every single person is showing up, that they aren't under the influence of something when they show up. And so the concern is that the legalization of marijuana, especially with the amount of THC in the marijuana today, which is much different than it was before, that was going to be problematic for us as we roll forward here.
And I know the prediction, at least the numbers I've read, are it could be as much as a $2 billion industry in the state of Ohio. I would imagine lawmakers are looking at it, or at least some of them anyhow, as a tax opportunity there for more revenue. In respect to that, how did that play into the legalization?
I don't think that had a whole lot to do with it. I think Ohio, much like Wyoming, we like our freedom here. And so I think people saw this as a way to kind of push back against the government, keep them out of our households, and that allowed this to be legalized. And part of the challenge in Ohio is that in 2015 it was legalized for medical purposes, and so there's been this I would say an acceptance of it, publicly accepted practice of marijuana. A lot of people thought already that it was legalized, and so this was not a big stretch from where we were previously. And so I think they thought that this was an easy one to say yes to, unfortunately.
And when you do hear marijuana is legalized in some aspect, you got to figure, okay, what can be bad about it? It's legalized, but marijuana can do a lot of damage to especially to young kids, to pregnant, to fetuses of pregnant women. What have you learned about what the downsides of marijuana that people might not be very aware of?
Sure. So, I think as young, I grew up in the 80s, and we learned of the downside of marijuana, much like we learned about smoking. And today you don't see that education out there. So one of the big challenges is being able to educate people before an election was very hard to try and help them understand that this is not a harmless herb or something that you can grow in your backyard, that it does have its downsides. We see it mostly in children. We see the issues with birth defects. We see problems with it, and certainly from an impairment standpoint, in terms of people driving up and down the road that are impaired. But just the negative social issues that come along with marijuana. It is a gateway drug. It's proven to be a gateway drug. It is stronger than it was, 20, 30 years ago. And so you got all those things all come together. And unfortunately, I think who's going to lose most on this are the kids. And certainly, I'm worried about it from my liability and from the safety of our employees, but more so, we got 1 in 10 kids in the state of Ohio that are being raised by somebody other than their parents already. And the number one reason for that is because of drug use and inability for people to raise the kids that they have. And so this will only exacerbate that problem further. And, it's a real challenge, I think, all across the board.
You'd mentioned this before about the marijuana of today is a far cry from the marijuana of the 60s, 70s, or 80s, even for that matter. Talk about how the potency of this drug and what you've learned about it and how it's so different than the marijuana of yesteryear.
Sure. We had on one of our panels for NPR out of Cincinnati, we had a doctor out of Yale that was talking about, back in the 70s, you average about 1.7% THC. Now we're 10 times that at 17% on average is the THC in the average marijuana joint or other products. And so the complications with that are there isn't a whole lot of data out there in terms of research versus I think but all we know is that it's going to be a lot worse based on the fact that it doesn't clear out of the system as quickly. It's something that is not like alcohol, even though the proponents of this really wanted it so that marijuana would be treated like alcohol. And the reality is it just is not. And you don't know when you're taking it how much is in it because there's no requirement to label it or do those things that alcohol has today. So it's a real control problem.
I understand somebody in Ohio made the reference that they thought marijuana is something akin to a souped up cigarette.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot because of the cartridges, especially the kids are using a lot of these cartridges. You can buy them online. They can buy them in any smoke shop. Seems like it's very readily available and will only get worse. Obviously once once the distribution can happen out of dispensaries. So yes, it's unfortunately, I think people don't know until it's too late that there's been a tremendous amount that the children's hospitals jumped on this because they said, look, our hospital rooms are getting full because we got all these kids coming in with really marijuana overdose or poisoning because they're taking this. And, this is a problem across the board. So it's going to be a challenge anywhere where it becomes legalized.
How about concerns over driving? And for example, obviously there's people go out, they drink, they drive. There's DUIs, DWIs in certain states. What kind of concern do you have about people driving around after smoking marijuana there in Ohio?
Sure. The statistics coming out of Colorado and Nevada and those that have already legalized it see this as somewhere between 40-50% increase in impaired driving. So that's a huge problem for Ohio. Not only are we number 3 in manufacturing, but we're also number 3 in commercial traffic. And we have major highways that run through Ohio all over the place. And so just the traffic alone, knowing that there will be that many more impaired drivers on the road is a problem. And it's very hard from a law enforcement standpoint for them to be able to measure this. Now, there are, in testing right now, there are some different saliva tests that they're trying to put out to be able to see if they can do any kind of field sobriety on this. Otherwise, it's a blood test or some other type of test, and not something that's readily available. Plus, the driver themselves don't know. We know just from alcohol that after a few beers, typically the average person shouldn't drive, and somebody who's smoking marijuana has no idea how much they can actually take and consume before they can't drive. And so I think there's a lot of, unfortunately, we probably, like other states, are going to learn the hard way on what this looks like.
And let's talk about the campaign to get this legalized. Do you have any idea how much you were outspent by and who was behind that effort, who was leading that effort?
Well, I think last numbers I heard were like 4-1 in terms of how much was raised. And going into the campaign, just the general surveys and polls that we ran had it at 60% passing. And so, I mean, in the state of Ohio, it's, again, like I said, a lot of freedom-loving people that want government out of their way. And this was a way to do that. But unfortunately, I don't think it was a great way. But so the campaign, we were outspent for sure. They have momentum on their side. This was not a high passion type campaign where I think a lot of people just said, they were kind of indifferent to it at the end of the day because they'd already seen so much because of the medical marijuana that they figured it's already out there. It's not a big deal. It's not a big stretch from where we are already.
So what kind of message would you share with people of a state like Wyoming, for example, where it's not legalized in any fashion at this point, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, my advice would be dig in and make sure that none of it gets passed, because the minute it gets passed, this marijuana lobby, you're talking about a brand new industry, $2 billion. You got lots of famous entertainers and other people that have invested in this because they've been told that this is going to, this is going to come to fruition and that this is going to happen across the country. And so it's a brand new industry where these people can make money off of it. And at the end of the day, it's so bad. There's not one good thing that I found that comes out of this. When we've already legalized in the state of Ohio, at least we had it already for marijuana purposes. But at the end of the day, if you can keep it out, I would keep it out altogether and not allow it to happen, because that's just, once you give that inch of medical marijuana, they will take a mile and you'll have it legalized across your state.
And really, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle.
There really isn't. And the social problems associated with this, that I mean, nobody's doing a study on what that social impact is in terms of the state having to pick up for people who can't work, people who've been now maimed or injured from an accident or work-related accident that are now living off of welfare and off a social system. And then just the kids and the other families that aren't going to be able to function when they get involved with this.
Something else that people might not think about, at least off the bat, would be grow, not necessarily just grow houses, but grow neighborhoods where cartels, whether they be from Mexico or China, come in and buy houses and decide a couple houses on the street. It's happened in other states where they're all of a sudden it's a grow neighborhood. And because it's legal to grow, and what they do ultimately probably is not legal at the bottom line, but they take advantage of these laws. Are you worried about that at all?
Oh, definitely. And just the commercialization of it, whether it's, illegal coming up across the border, but also just what we saw in Colorado and some of the complaints over there, which there were more dispensaries than there were McDonald's and Starbucks combined. If you think about that across each city in the state, what that looks like. Now, a lot of communities have come back and they're trying to do that in Ohio, try and limit it so that there's no dispensaries allowed within their city limits. And that only pushes them out to more rural areas where there's less ability to really control it. But it's going to be a huge challenge.
And how, as a business owner, how are you going to handle this when it comes to hiring people?
Well, my first approach has been education and making sure that we educate first our staff members, but then also our plant floor. So very quickly and over the holidays and that when I'm out talking to employees, that is making sure that they understand that our rules as an employer have not changed. We are a drug-free workplace and we have to be that way for everybody's safety. And in order to come to work, it's on your responsibility to come to work sober. So we start first with education and really showing them, because a lot of my employees even are like, what? I didn't know that. I didn't know about the impact of this. I didn't know that it would have any long lasting effect. I really just thought like it was a cigarette or you're right, like a souped up cigarette. And the reality is that it can have very detrimental effects to people's health. And so helping them understand that and helping them be the adults in the room too of taking this responsibility on. And we just watch it more closely. We have random testing, we have reasonable suspicion testing, we have post-accident testing. So all of those come into play, and we'll be utilizing those as much as possible.
So Angela, is there anything that I'm not asking you that you would like to share?
No, I just, I am grateful for the state of Wyoming that people there make the right choice here, and that this does not continue to spread across the country. It's unfortunately, I look at countries like Japan, which is they ban marijuana completely. If you showed up there with so much as a hint of marijuana on you, you're going straight to jail. Absolute zero tolerance. And this is one of our main competitors on a world scale. So I think that's telling to us. There are very few countries around the world that actually allow marijuana to be sold legally or utilized legally, and there's a reason for that. I mean, it's a drain on society. It makes people unproductive, and it becomes a problem where everybody has to live off the government, and countries don't want that.
Yep, and I even think, from what I understand, in China, there's even the death penalty for drug dealers.
Yes.
So many of these countries are taking a strong stand, and ours is not. And hopefully people can wake up.
Yeah, I hope so.
Right.
Great to talk
Angela
to you.
Phillips, yep, thank you so much. We appreciate it. If people want to learn more about what's happening around the state of Wyoming, and even what's happening in many respects around the country, just go to wyliberty.org, wyliberty.org. Thanks again, Angela.
Yep, thank you.